Hi, I'm the Tabletop Teacher. Well, we have a new HeroClix Powers and Abilities card, as well as new rules. I always see rules changes as a very good thing in miniatures games. It means that designers and developers are always working on the game, that they are listening to feedback, that they strive to make the game better. An absence of change doesn't mean we've found the perfect set of rules. It only means we've stopped thinking about them. And in this video, we're going to take a look at several key changes in the 2021 HeroClix Powers and Abilities card. Most of the powers and abilities function the same, some are exactly as they were, wording has been simplified in some cases, but there are several powers and abilities that have gone through more significant changes. This video aims to offer a quick overview to help existing players get a sense of what's new. So, if you are a new player, while this could help you get a sense of a few standard powers, know that it might be a little overwhelming because the starting point for this video is familiarity with the 2018 Powers and Abilities card. So here we go. Leap Climb is not a move action anymore. It now grants a character improved movement through elevations, outdoor blocking terrain, and this character can move through squares occupied by or adjacent to opposing characters without stopping. You don't need to give the character a move action per se to get the improved movement anymore. This means that if a character can use Leap Climb, as well as something like Charge, Running Shot, or Hypersonic Speed, they get the improvements to movement when using those powers. And if you're wondering why Leap Climb doesn't grant improved movement through hindering terrain anymore, it's because hindering terrain does not affect movement now. No more stopping in hindering terrain and cutting your speed value in 2 when leaving hindering terrain for non-flyers. The +2 to breakaway is dropped, and I like it. It makes sense. Being acrobatic doesn't mean you are slippery. We'll see how plasticity addresses this in a few moments. And one last thing, Leap Climb doesn't allow for close attacks on different elevations anymore. That's fine. Makes things simpler. Characters that are Earthbound neutralized keep their willpower from now on. They lose their improved abilities as before, but that's it. Charge loses the can't be knocked back phrase, and this is fantastic in my opinion. I like that it makes Charge more comic accurate. With the now older rules, a charging character that would have been knocked back 6 squares into hindering terrain, for example, was pretty much useless for a turn, I understand that. Now that hindering terrain doesn't affect movement, and that knockback is set at 3 squares, there's no reason for Charge to have this knockback exception anymore. A character that was knocked back will likely have a chance to charge again in the next turn if they still have charge, unless they fell off an elevation and don't have a way to get back to where they were, which makes knockback strategically more interesting. I mean, even Wonder Woman can get knocked back by a strong attack. This is going to make fights that much more exciting, with many more characters getting knocked back left and right. And the fact that knockback damage is gone doesn't make this devastating, but just more dynamic. Mind Control gets a minimum range of 6, and this is true of all the powers that grant a minimum range value for their use. It's all 6 now. Plasticity gets a serious rewording and changes. The modifiers to breakaway are gone and are replaced by clear descriptions. A character that can use plasticity only fails to break away on a 1, and other characters need a 6 to break away from this character, unless they can use Phasing Teleport, Leap Climb, Hypersonic Speed, or Plasticity themselves. Also, the exceptions for characters that had improved movement with the arrow thingy, now called Improved Movement Move Through, and improved movement characters are gone, making things clearer, simpler, and probably in most instances more comic accurate. Plasticity is amazing against most characters, but it makes sense to me that speedsters, acrobats, and other elastic characters wouldn't have as much difficulty breaking away from characters using plasticity. It also makes sense to me that teleporters, ghosts, and phasing characters would have no problem at all breaking away from anyone, even Mr. Fantastic. Force Blast gets a super boost. I love it. Look at this. Minimum range 6. You don't need to be adjacent anymore. And no more rolling a d6 and getting a disappointing 1. The knockback is set for 3 squares and away from this character. Period. While knockback damage is now a thing of the past, Force Blast can now be very disruptive to teams counting on adjacency to build up their powers, and you can also use it to push characters off elevations, which will make it difficult for some to get back into position. I'm very happy with this change. It makes this standard power more versatile now that it has a minimum range value, and more reliable now that the number of squares of knockback is set to 3. This makes it more power action worthy in my opinion. Hypersonic speed lost its breakaway +2, although it is referred to in plasticity. This does mean that speedsters that can only make close attacks run a higher risk of getting stuck adjacent to their target after their attack. Improved movement through characters will become that much more important for speedsters from now on. There's a small change in Blade's Claw's Fangs that's worth noting. This attack needs to be made on a single target from now on. So if a character has 2 or more bolts and is adjacent to 2 or more opposing characters, they'll have to choose if they are targeting one character with their Blade's Claw's Fangs attack or more opposing characters with some other attack before making the attack roll. At first I thought there was a little typo in Pulse Wave, but that's not it. When you hit 1 or more characters with Pulse Wave, damage dealt is 1 instead of normal damage, in all circumstances from now on. There's no way to deal full printed damage anymore with Pulse Wave. That's going to change the attack power hierarchy. Quake is not a close action anymore, which means this will allow for new power combinations, with Close Combat Expert for instance. Which makes characters like this 30-point Dragon Man much more interesting. And like Force Blast, Quake grants the knockback key phrase whether the character attacks with Quake or not. That's why the knockback key phrase is separate from Quake's multi-target effect. Note that, unlike Super Strength, it doesn't stipulate that the knockback is only an option during close attacks. Incapacitate loses something and gains something else. Characters hit by Incapacitate that already had 2 action tokens are not dealt 1 penetrating damage anymore. But Incapacitate is neither a close or range action anymore, so again, this could be used in combination with other powers in very interesting ways, like a Quake Incapacitate for instance, where each hit character is given an action token instead of normal damage. Which is something every character that can use Quake could very well do if they were using Diablo's Alchemical Potion. Penetrating Psychic Blast is not a range action anymore. This is big. It is now a passive power. When this character makes a range attack, damage is penetrating. This might feel a little strange if the character is throwing a garbage can, but it is going to make for some crazy combos, notably a penetrating energy explosion, which is something this other version of Dragon Man could do. Smoke Cloud gets a minimum range of 6 as well. You can't make object attacks with telekinesis anymore. You can place objects and characters from one square to another as before, but you can't use the objects for attacks. Combat Reflexes, like Charge, loses the knockback protection. Keep in mind that knockback damage is gone. Again, more comic accurate in my opinion. To me, it makes sense that an extremely heavy character couldn't be knocked back, like Vision that can change his density, but Combat Reflexes are more about being harder to hit. Barrier gets its minimum range boosted to 6, like all the others now. Willpower is one of the biggest changes. Pushing damage is not part of the game anymore. Willpower now works like a personal version of leadership, if you will. At the beginning of your turn, you roll a d6, and on a 5 or a 6, you get to remove an action token from this character. While we're on this subject, note that the Indomitable key phrase has been removed. The shield symbol with the bar across it is now the new standard defense symbol. Characters with willpower will now have a chance of being given a non-free action on every turn if they're lucky. It's unlikely, but it is possible. This makes a character like Ultra Humanite here even more dangerous. Invincible loses the takes a maximum of 3 damage part. Invincible is now essentially invulnerability that can reduce penetrating damage. Much simpler, but it will hurt those characters we would count on to take a hit. Range Combat Expert is not a power action anymore, so it can now be used in combination with Running Shot, for instance. There's no choice to be made regarding the modifiers, it's de facto +1 to both attack and damage values, but you can now also use Range Combat Expert when destroying objects or blocking terrain. The same goes for Close Combat Expert, by the way, which you can now combo with Quake, for example. The Prime version of Citizen Steel here can charge, use Quake with Close Combat Expert, and this combo will give him an 11 attack and 5 damage if he targets a single character. Wouch. Being in a battle fury doesn't protect from incapacitate anymore. The only safeguard, a new key phrase replacing protected in this instance, is against mind control from now on. The rest of this power remains the same. Exploit weakness is now a passive power instead of a close action. This means it can be combined with other close attack powers. So Dark Britain's 30-point charge, flurry, blades is now dealing penetrating damage. Ooh la la. And finally, Perplex cannot be used to modify damage anymore. So that's it for the key changes I've seen in the powers section. Now for the abilities. The carry ability has done away with this speed penalty and doesn't exclude vehicles anymore, at least not in the wording we see here on the PAC. If we skip to the passenger key phrase right away, it would seem that the restriction regarding flying characters is out as well. This will open up all kinds of new strategies. Mind you, the core rulebook doesn't address vehicles, so maybe we'll find out more about that when the comprehensive rulebook comes out. There's no more damage distinction for light or heavy objects, whether they're used in a close attack or thrown. Using an object in a close attack, whether it's light or heavy, will modify damage +1, and throwing it will deal 2 damage instead of normal damage. As I mentioned before, hindering terrain is not an issue for movement anymore, so the improved movement through hindering was removed from the list. This is going to make a lot of characters more viable in competitive settings. Look at Huntress here. She had stealth, but hindering terrain was a problem for movement. Not anymore. The same applies to water terrain because it was hindering terrain for movement purposes. The improved movement characters has been adjusted to reflect the changes to plasticity. In the key phrase abilities section, Indomitable is out as mentioned before. Colossal stamina is now a thing of the past. From now on, all characters of great size, that's giants and colossi, will have an improved version of the new willpower. This will give quite the boost to giants and colossi that didn't have willpower before. Very lucky for MODOK. There seems to be a little difference between the knockback power action from Force Blast and the knockback key phrase that would activate from rolling doubles or found in different powers, including Force Blast. A power action Force Blast is set to 3 squares, but the key phrase knockback seems to allow the knockback to be less. The core rulebook says the knockback from attacks is up to 3 squares. There seems to be room for a choice here. Again, there might be further details in the comprehensive rulebook. Maybe the knockback is always set for 3 squares unless there's something in the way, like a character or blocking terrain or a higher elevation. No news at this time if multi-base characters can now be knocked back. They are not addressed in the core rulebook. So we'll have to wait and see to get more details on knockback. Protected probability control is removed from the PAC, and so is RAM, but RAM is essentially a power, not an ability. When a character has it, it's usually spelled out on the card anyway, as a trait or special power. No need to have it on the PAC, really. The changes to swim are interesting. It would be very hard to target someone who's in water from a certain distance, indeed. Instead of the bonus to defense, characters with the swim symbol cannot be targeted by characters more than 4 squares away when they occupy water terrain. Maps with lots of water are not very common though. To take advantage of this, you really have to build a force that has characters that can generate water. So these are the key changes I've noticed in the PAC. I hope I haven't missed anything major, but at some point, only time will tell. As we play with these new rules, powers, and abilities, new questions will present themselves, for sure. From what I gather, these changes will open up all sorts of new strategies, and will most certainly make many characters much more interesting to play than before. Just think of all the characters you might have set aside before because they weren't indomitable. They all get better chances to make the cut in your next force now. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks to my patrons on Patreon for helping produce these videos, and please consider joining them if you like this content. Thanks to the great folks at WizKids for sending me an advance copy of the Wonder Woman 80th Anniversary Miniatures game so I could get my hands on the new Powers and Abilities card. Pre-order yours at your favorite local game shop. It should be coming out on April 21st. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and as always, thanks for playing with me.